Hello, welcome to Chili Talk. I'm Neil Davidson. I am on Zoom with Pete Leihy, as always, and today we're stepping back from Chilean politics, and we're going to talk about an Anglo-Hispanic hybrid, which is our raison d'etre really, which is an album that's been a re-release of an Elvis Costello album, which Pete is going to just quickly tell us about now.
Yes, 1978's this year's model has been reimagined as Spanish model, and it consists of the original backing tracks and some of Elvis's original, mostly backing vocals, with new vocals laid over the top by some of the leading Latin pop stars from a wide range of countries in Latin America and the United States, if that's not in Latin America. And also from Spain, we have a couple of contributors. So it's quite an interesting project.
That's right. Now, you know, I should be qualified to talk about this because I was actually alive during the 1970s. So I should be able to take a kind of bird's eye view of the whole thing. In actual fact, the 70s rather passed me by. I didn't listen to any Elvis Costello until about 1985. I grew up in North Dorset in the province of the province. There's no pop music was allowed in my house, only classical music, Radio 3. And I didn't start listening to pop music until I got my own radio in about 1982 when I was 14. So, you know, but I will just say something very briefly about the 1970s. From the perspective of one who was 12 when this album came out. They were a time when adults were, you know, the assassination of Kennedy was still fairly, you know, pretty recent memory, something. Then my father always claimed to have given it no importance, I remember. The Vietnam War, that was something that people talked about, adults, but it was of no interest to me at all. What I remember about the 1970s was going to London on the train, getting out at Waterloo Station and seeing a gypsy woman urinating on a pile of rubbish, you know. And that's how much London has changed. You know, you don't see that now. It was kind of, it had a slight touch of the third world about it back in those days, you know.
This was the winter before the winter of discontent. I think
this was just before the winter of discontent, absolutely, when bodies went on, you know, everybody was on strike. Bodies were unburied, the rubbish wasn't collected, power cuts, you know, it was pretty third world, actually. There were, I think since then, I've read, apparently there were murmurings in the army, you know, that the idea of a military coup was not wholly unthinkable, supposedly. I don't know much about it. Pete, you've read more history than me. What do you know about this?
Well, we'll certainly be talking about that later in this series because, of course, a lot of Latin American countries, if not the majority, were under some form of military government at the time or had just come out of one.
And so Britain nearly joined you, Latin Americans, possibly back then, and we certainly had all the kind of Peronist, you know, accoutrements, power cuts, you know, sort of inflation. I remember my parents talking about inflation was, I think it went up to about 20%. We never had anything like hyperinflation. I think it may have peaked at 22% or something. But I remember that being talked. That was one of my childhood memories. My father groaning about the inflation, you know.
Yeah.
And so, you know, definitely a third world feeling. On the other hand, Britain was still, you know, quite traditional in many ways, as of course is much of Latin America, you know. For example, you know, the 70s, you've spoken to me, Pete, about the 70s as a golden age of pornography, to take one subject area.
White goods. We've got some white goods. Yeah.
When every family started getting, you know, their fridge and their telly, you know, I suppose perhaps slightly earlier, but I just remember that my friends and I, we're talking probably about the early 80s here, slightly older, we're 14, 16. I remember my life as being just one long effort to get hold of pornography, and it was impossible. I mean, there were porn mags, not what we would call pornography now, really, just magazines, Playboy, whatever, Penthouse, just with very tasteful pictures of ladies with no clothes on. I say hardly qualifies pornography now. We couldn't get them. You'd occasionally find one in a ditch or something, great celebrations for a week afterwards, And then the great triumph was when a friend and I went to a porn shop, a specialist porn shop. We managed to hire 2 porn videos. You can imagine our joy till we got home and found that these videos had been redacted, had been censored, and all nudity and sex scenes had been removed from these videos that were porn videos and had no other interest. I leave you to imagine the kind of what was left. Anyway, but I mustn't go too far off the subject. So that was the 1970s, this mixture in Britain, this mixture of really something quite seething, economically and socially upheaval, and still a great sort of social conservatism, and Elvis Costello. So when did you? So I didn't actually hear Costello at the time. When did you hear him, Pete? Because you were not around, or you were extremely young when that album came out.
Yes, a funny parallel. I mean, this album was recorded at the very end of 1977 and the very beginning of 1978. Recorded very quickly by Elvis Costello and his new hot band. And I was born on the 11th of January 1978. So I've always had a sort of affinity with that period of time. It's always intrigued me. And when I was about 12, I became interested in Elvis Costello. I'm not sure why, but something about him, and particularly his very early albums, attracted me. I remember my dad going to the library and borrowing some Elvis Costello cassettes, which I would listen to and, of course, copy on a ghetto blaster onto my own cassette and listen to them ad infinitum. And I've always had this enormous fascination with the 70s in Britain. A lot of wonderful books have come out over the last few years about the 70s. Really, really interesting time.
It was an interesting time. I mean, just to perhaps add the third leg to the stool of what I was saying, this like upheaval, this almost third world kind of upheaval, the social conservatism. And of course, the parts of the British Empire were still going on. I mean, I am actually a child of empires, just about.
Yes.
Rhodesia and then Zimbabwe was still a colony.
Yes, well, as Elvis Costello would sing on his subsequent album, the one after this, Hong Kong is up for grabs, London is full of Arabs. We could be in Palestine, overrun by a Chinese line with the boys from the Mersey and the Thames and the Tyne.
Right. That's it. Well, I remember very well when Hong Kong was returned to China. So I made a very quick digression. When Hong Kong was returned to China, because of course it was 1999. It was 2000. By which time I was in my 30s. So, and there were posters up in post offices saying, if you have Hong Kong like money orders, please make sure and cash them in before the 31st of December 1999. So to me it feels all very recent. But anyway, enough of that little trip down my personal memory lane. So anyway, this album is very interesting. It's been the singers, the Spanish language singers who've done the remake are, well, they're excellent singers. I think they're all pretty good. Some very well known, like Fito Páez from Argentina. Others less so. The first track on the first LP, let's have a little look at it, is No Action, which has kept that title in the Spanish version. And it was recorded by Nina Díaz. And perhaps also showing my age, possibly, I immediately looked her up on Wikipedia to find she wasn't there. To a man, is Wikipedia already dated? Because it's an article of faith for me now, I suppose, that if something isn't in Wikipedia, it essentially doesn't exist. But this girl clearly does exist.
Well, she's still quite a niche talent. She's a Tejana. She's a Texan of Mexican descent, and she sings quite a bit in Spanish. She's got a beautiful ringing voice that's quite a change from Elvis Costello's kind of angry young man persona of the time, when he had a real attack in his voice. And of course, the original version of the song from 1978 is one of the most famous opening tracks in the rock canon. It announces the band, this incredibly tight rhythm section with Pete Thomas on drums and Bruce Thomas on bass, making this very exciting, propulsive sound. And she takes it into another dimension. It's got a lovely sort of ringing sound, a bit more poised.
Plenty of energy, but as you say, perhaps not the same attack, not the same kind of bite.
Yes, and we're going to actually give stars. I'm obsessed with giving stars to things from Elvis Costello, stars out of 5, because Elvis Costello always does very well on star rankings. So we'll give stars to all the songs on the first side of the album, and in subsequent episodes we'll cover the second side, and then we'll cover the bonus tracks in a third presentation. In this case, I would like to give it 4 out of 5. I would give Elvis Costello's version 5, and I think this is a very, very meritorious performance, and I give it 4.
That's it. And of course, a 5-star system is a very like rough tool, isn't it? You know, so I guess if it's not 5, it's got to be 4. So it doesn't sound that great, but it's pretty good. Well, and you know, so we have well, it was translated. These Spanish language tracks were produced by Sebastian Cris, who's this long-time collaborator, isn't he, of Elvis Costello. I'm not sure exactly who did the Spanish translations, but they're all very well done in the sense that they do fit the music. They really do. Very proficient in that way, you know, and they've got a real sort of cadence, you know, and they make sense kind of sonorously. The actual meaning of the words is quite interesting. Now, first of all, this particular song, No Actions, clearly it's been updated, right? Costello talks about Bakelite, because telephones back in that day, as I well remember, were made often of Bakelite, which is a kind of primitive type of plastic, I think, or it could even be kind of wood. I'm not sure what it is, really, you know. I think it's kind of plastic. It's quite attractive, actually. Of course, everybody knows what it is because it has a kind of retro cachet now, doesn't it? So I don't actually need to explain what Bakelite is. He talks about Bakelite. So you see him like picking up this telephone and sort of like dialing the number like that, you know, which I can very well remember doing. And probably lots of people do now because they've got like retro dial-up phones. You know, that's the trouble. You know, the gramophones come back. You know, retro phones. You can't surprise anybody these days by reminiscing about your childhood. You know, but she talks about her mobile. Okay, no soy junkie del móvil. So okay, updated for modern times. And another way in which it seems to have been updated is rather mysterious, because the narrator in the original version is, we take it, somebody very much like Costello himself, a man who's having difficulties with a woman, and he rings her up, but there's somebody else out there, a rival who owns a car. You know, now this takes me straight back to the 1980s. I remember this girl I knew boasting about her boyfriend. She was 16, he was 23. So he's 23 and he's got a car, you know, and like, wow, you know, that's it, you know, say no more. We know what you see in him, you know.
I think that would almost be investigated by the police these days, 23 and 16.
Oh, well, absolutely. I suppose it could have been back then, but it was legal, you know. Anyway, you know, but you know, this was North Dorset, so the car, you can imagine, was a kind of souped up Ford Escort as well, probably, you know, and that probably put him out of reach of the law, you know. And so, similarly in this Elvis Costello track, we have the same setup. You know, he has a rival and the rival's got a car, and so that immediately makes him, how does it go? He's got the keys to the car, They are the keys to the kingdom. He's got everything you need. You know, so curiously enough, the narrator in the Spanish version is a woman. She speaks of herself as, you know, as a woman, and she's speaking to a man, I suppose, but the rival is still a man. So I guess this is kind of taking us into, you know, something that is unfamiliar to me from my teenage years, which, I mean, unless the whole thing is just a complete chaos and words are used at random, then I suppose whoever did this version knew what they were doing. And we have here a kind of sexual fluidity, which was not familiar to me in my youth at all. You know, what about you, Pete, in Australia? You know.
Oh yes, no, that sort of stuff certainly didn't come in until the late 90s, I would say, in Australia. But it seems that here in Latin America, I mean, obviously, sexuality in general has always been bigger in Latin America than it has been in the Anglo cultures. They've really taken to the fluidity and all of the different identity commitments you can have around sexuality. They're really enthusiastic about it. So I think it's highly appropriate. But we should run through the rest of the tracks on the side and see what's coming up next. This is interesting. We've got Yo no quiero ir a Chelsea. I don't want to go to Chelsea, which was on the original UK version of the album. It was actually taken off the American version for being too parochially British, the idea of Chelsea. It's hard to believe today that Chelsea would be considered a parochial term in the United States, or maybe they confuse it with the Chelsea Hotel and the Chelsea area of New York. Very interesting.
So you're saying that now Chelsea is now a celebrated enough place that even here in the south of the world, it actually has some resonance.
Yes, we certainly know, certainly from football, but I think even the very concept, there's a program called Made in Chelsea about these Sloanes or pseudo Sloanes living in Chelsea. I think most people know what Chelsea means. They probably knew what Mayfair meant in those days, but now everybody knows what Chelsea means as well, which is quite interesting. And this song has been covered by a Puerto Rican, Raquel Sofía, and a Dominican who was actually born in Washington, D.C., Fuego. Fuego seems to be a kind of rapper, or I'm not sure exactly how to put the term for the rap, because of course Latin rap has its own varieties. There's a reggaeton style one, and there's one that's called trap but doesn't seem to have much to do with the trap that's in the south of the United States. And these two butcher what is a very straightforward up-tempo song by sticking a rap in it and overthinking it. It's a bit of a harebrained song with a very fast riff, very fast and distinctive riff that they don't take full advantage of, and they has a kind of incoherent psychiatric hospital theme, both in particularly in the English version and probably in the Spanish version to a lesser extent. And this is not good.
They kind of misunderstood the energy of the song and turned it into and rap.
They wanted to make it too much their own. They did not really surrender to the song. And this is only getting 1 star from me. So, I mean, whereas Nina's getting 4, maybe even 4.5, this is only 1. And after that, we have an interesting example. On the Beat is the name of the song in English. On the Beat, in the most standard sense, means the policeman's beat. But of course, by the 1970s, this might be a reference to some kind of homosexual pickup or something like that. I'm not sure. Could mean anything. It's a kind of upbeat song, quite nice, done by Draco Rosa, who's a New Yorkino, a Puerto Rican in New York, and it's been translated as "Yo te vi," which makes quite a nice use of the fact that obviously in English we pay some attention to the way that words terminate when we think of rhymes and assonance, but in Spanish we don't pay so much attention to that because they usually end in vowels or a much more reduced number of consonants. So
he's got something that rhymes with beat. He's got something that sounds like on the beat.
Yeah, with the beat. There's something about the attack of V that sounds like beat. It's got that sharpness.
So it's a bit like Ezra Pound's translations of Latin poetry, where he just used English words that happened to sound like the Latin words and produced a totally different poem.
Yes, always a danger, overusing Latinate vocabulary in English, a real register problem often. I'm giving this 3.5 stars. I'm willing to go 3.5 for Draco Rosa. And next we have the first kind of single that I first heard. Have you any experience with this song, Pump It Up?
I can't say I have. I mean, I've heard it, but I mean, I haven't formulated any thoughts on it.
Yes, well, this is a song I read about its composition in one of Elvis Costello's compilations, The Girls Plus Mine Minus Pound Symbol Girls, Girls, Girls. It's Girls, 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 essentially, but it's some kind of parody of the Elvis album of the same name, the Elvis Presley album of the same name. And he talks about composing this on some fire stairs while hepped up on amphetamine in Newcastle upon Tyne, I believe, back in 1977. And it's a bit of an iconic kind of almost a rap style song with a very simple hook, and he kind of just sings over the top, basically using the one chord. I think the whole thing's in with the one chord, a B7 chord, and he just raps over the top of it. One of his most popular songs, but not a particularly sonorous composition. And Juanes, who's this sort of heartthrob from Colombia, puts in a very manful performance. He comes up with a kind of psychedelic sound. It's not too bad. It's competent. It's competent. I'm willing to give him 3.5 as well.
Okay, sounds good. I'm just letting you talk because I have not done the kind of rigorous analysis necessary to give like stars to these songs.
Yes, well, I'm obsessed with giving stars for things to do with Elvis Costello. It's something of a tradition for the kind of nerds who are into Elvis Costello. And the next one we have is a very interesting song from La Marisoul, who's a singer from the Los Angeles band La Santa Cecilia. Santa Cecilia is the patron saint of musicians. And yes, and their style, I'm not exactly sure how to explain the style of this band. Obviously, they do a number of genres, as Latin bands tend to do. Perhaps it's ranchera. It's kind of country music, Latin country music. Quite a nice band. And her version of the song Little Triggers, which is a country style ballad, if you like, it's called Detonantes. It's a nice translation, and she does very well with it. I can't decide whether to give this 4.5 or 5 stars.
Oh, you say so the best was saved till last. Then this is a real triumph in your view.
There's one more to come from the biggest star on this side, which is Luis Fonsi, one of the biggest Caribbean stars from Puerto Rico. Of course, Puerto Rico, perhaps through its connections both with Mexico and Miami, produces an enormous number of huge Latin stars. And Luis Fonsi is one of the very biggest ones. And he does a version of You Belong to Me. You Belong to Me, which seems to be some sort of reference to a Bob Dylan song, I guess. But sort of upbeat song. Tu eres para mí is his song. It's quite romantic. It's quite nice. There's a little bit of acid, both in the Elvis Costello version and in this Spanish rendering. It's nice. I'm going to give it 4 stars.
Okay. So just a slight falling away from the peak reached with the previous song. Okay. Well, I think we're going to try and look a bit more carefully at some of the lyrics, aren't we? And do a kind of, sort of critical analysis
Yes.
of what has been done with his English lyrics in Spanish and what it says, maybe about cultural differences.
Yes, spoiler alert, side B is much stronger than side A.
Okay. So we're going to we're going to get studious, aren't we, Pete? And we're going to do this properly in a future episode of Chili Talk. Thank you very much for joining us on this occasion, and
Thank you.
Hope to see you then.